NUM 1972, Gene Cernan climbed back into the lunar module, looked out the window at the surface of the moon one final time and said, "We shall return." That was the promise of a generation. And for 53 years, nobody kept it. Not once. Not a single human being left low Earth orbit between December of 1972 and April of 2025. The longest gap in exploration since our species figured out how to explore. Half a century of satellites, space stations, rovers, telescopes, and not one human being went back beyond the protective bubble of Earth's magnetic field. Now, 4 people are out there again, and what they are discovering, or more precisely, what the instruments they are carrying are measuring for the very first time, is beginning to expose something uncomfortable about the Apollo program. Something that the celebrations, the flags, the ticker tape parades, and 50 years of mythology have quietly buried. Here's the paradox at the center of this story. Apollo succeeded. 12 human beings walked on the moon and came home alive. By every measure that 1969 understood, it was a triumph. But Artemis II is collecting data that Apollo never had the tools to collect. And that data is raising a question that nobody in 1972 thought to ask. What if Apollo did not prove that humans were ready for deep space? What if it only proved that 12 people survived it? Those are not the same thing. And if Artemis II confirms what current science already suspects, then everything we think we know about human spaceflight, about the road to Mars, about our place in the universe beyond this planet, is built on a foundation that was never as solid as we believed. So let us look at what we actually got wrong. Here's the thing about Apollo's mistakes. They were not the mistakes of incompetence. They were the mistakes of a civilization doing something for the first time with tools that had never existed before under a political deadline that had nothing to do with science. You cannot blame the engineers of 1969 for not knowing what we know today. But you can look honestly at what they got wrong and understand why those gaps matter right now in 2025, with 4 people sitting in a capsule 250,000 miles from the nearest hospital. Mistake number 1, Apollo never actually measured deep space radiation. It estimated it. The Apollo astronauts carried dosimeters, passive devices that recorded total radiation exposure after the fact, the way a sunburn tells you that you stayed outside too long. What they did not carry was anything capable of distinguishing between different types of radiation in real time. Galactic Cosmic Rays, solar particle events, secondary neutron cascades produced when high-energy particles strike the hull of the spacecraft itself. Artemis II carries all of that. For the first time in history, we are measuring what deep space radiation actually looks like, particle by particle, in real time, inside a crewed vehicle. And here is why that distinction matters. Galactic cosmic rays are not like the radiation from an X-ray machine. They are atomic nuclei, iron nuclei, silicon nuclei, traveling at a significant fraction of the speed of light, fired across the galaxy by supernovae that exploded before Earth existed. When one of those particles passes through brain tissue, it does not simply ionize a few cells. It carves a track of biological damage through everything in its path. Apollo astronauts reported seeing flashes of light with their eyes closed. That was galactic cosmic rays striking their retinas directly. We knew it then. We did not have the tools to measure what else those particles were doing. Mistake number 2, Apollo concluded that 2 weeks was safe. That conclusion was based on 12 people, 12 human beings, maximum mission duration of 12 and a half days. No longitudinal follow-up study, no control group, no neurological imaging, no cardiovascular monitoring beyond basic vital signs. From that sample, NASA drew conclusions about human tolerance for deep space that shaped 5 decades of mission planning. To be precise, those conclusions were not wrong for what Apollo needed. Short missions, specific objectives, acceptable risk within understood parameters, but they were never designed to be extrapolated to 500-day Mars missions. And somehow quietly they were. Artemis II is monitoring sleep architecture, cognitive performance under radiation load, cardiovascular adaptation, and psychological resilience in ways that Apollo never attempted. The data does not exist yet. That is the point. We are collecting it now for the first time, and whatever it shows will either confirm or directly challenge assumptions that have gone untested for half a century. Mistake number 3. Apollo was flown by Houston. Artemis has to learn to fly itself. During Apollo, the communication delay between Earth and the Moon averaged about 1.3 seconds each way. Workable. Mission Control made the critical decisions. The crew executed them. That division of responsibility worked beautifully for the Moon. Mars operates on a delay of between 3 and 22 minutes each way, depending on orbital position. In a medical emergency, in a navigation crisis, in any situation that requires a decision in under 40 minutes, ground control is functionally useless. The crew is alone in every meaningful sense. Artemis II is the first crewed mission to deliberately practice manual piloting in deep space, not during docking, not during landing, in open space, far from Earth, testing how a human crew can operate a vehicle autonomously when no one on the ground can help them in time. Apollo never needed to solve that problem. The road to Mars cannot avoid it. There is a particular kind of scientific discomfort that comes not from knowing something terrible, but from knowing that you do not know something critical. Apollo gave us confidence. Artemis II is giving us precision. And precision in this case is revealing 3 unsolved problems that sit directly between humanity and any serious future in deep space. These are not engineering problems. Engineering problems get solved with money and time. These are biological and physical unknowns, gaps in our fundamental understanding of what happens to the human body and the human mind when you remove every protection that 4 billion years of evolution built around them. Unknown number 1, what galactic cosmic rays do to the human brain over time. In 2018, NASA funded a study at the University of California in which mice were exposed to galactic cosmic ray simulations at doses equivalent to a Mars mission. The results were significant enough to be published and significant enough to be quietly unsettling. The exposed mice showed measurable cognitive decline, increased anxiety responses, structural changes in the prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain responsible for decision-making, impulse control, emotional regulation, and long-term planning. Now stop and sit with that for a moment, the prefrontal cortex. The part of the brain that a crew commander needs most during a systems failure at 2 a.m, 200 days into a Mars transit, when the ground cannot respond for 20 minutes and 3 other people are looking at them for a decision. We have evidence from animal models that the radiation environment of deep space may progressively impair exactly that capability. And we do not yet have equivalent data from human beings because until Artemis II, no human being had been in deep space long enough with instruments sensitive enough to generate it. This is not a confirmed outcome. It is an open question. But it is an open question that we are only now, in 2025, beginning to ask with the right tools. Unknown number 2, whether our heat shield models are accurate enough to trust with human lives returning from deep space. In 2022, Artemis I returned to Earth without a crew. Engineers examining the recovered capsule found erosion patterns in the ablative heat shield material that did not match the predictions of their computational models. Sections of the shield had charred and separated in ways that the simulations had not anticipated. The underlying structure held. The internal temperatures remained within survivable limits, but the models were wrong. NASA convened an independent review team. The analysis took years. The conclusion delivered publicly was that the Artemis II crew could fly, but that the heat shield design would need modification before Artemis III. The crew of Artemis II is therefore re-entering Earth's atmosphere at speeds faster than any human beings in history on a heat shield that performed unexpectedly on its only previous test flight, with a revised but not redesigned thermal protection system. This is not speculation. This is the documented engineering situation. And it points to a deeper problem. Our ability to model the physical behavior of materials under the extreme conditions of lunar return re-entry is not yet as precise as our confidence in those models has sometimes suggested. That gap between model and reality is itself an unknown, and closing it requires exactly the kind of real flight data that Artemis II is generating right now. Unknown number 3, what isolation in deep space does to a small group of human beings across extended time. 4 people, a habitable volume roughly equivalent to 2 minivans, no ability to leave, no ability to be truly alone, no fresh air, no natural light, no horizon, no ground beneath their feet, for 10 days on Artemis II, for 500 days on a Mars mission. The psychological research on isolated confined environments, Antarctic winter overstations, submarine deployments, simulated Mars missions in analog facilities, consistently identifies a cluster of risks that emerge not in the first days, but in the middle phase of a long mission. Interpersonal friction that compounds under stress, cognitive monotony that dulls alertness, a phenomenon researchers call third quarter syndrome, in which performance and morale decline sharply in the latter portion of a long isolated mission before recovering as the end approaches. Apollo missions were too short for any of this to manifest meaningfully. The data we have from the International Space Station comes from low Earth orbit, where crews can see the planet below them, where emergency evacuation is theoretically possible within hours, where the psychological reality of being connected to Earth is fundamentally different from the psychological reality of being genuinely beyond it. Artemis II is the first mission in 53 years to put human beings in the environment where these dynamics actually apply. The monitoring protocols on this mission, sleep tracking, cognitive load assessment, interpersonal communication patterns, represent the first serious attempt to gather baseline data from the actual environment rather than from an analog approximation of it. 3 unknowns: brain damage we cannot yet confirm or rule out. Heat shield behavior we cannot yet fully predict. Human psychology in deep isolation we have never properly studied. These are not reasons to stop. They are reasons to pay very close attention to what Artemis II brings back. Stop thinking about the crew for a moment. Stop thinking about NASA, about mission control, about trajectory calculations and heat shield ablation rates. Forget all of that. Think about your own body. Right now, sitting where you are, every single day, approximately 1 million galactic cosmic ray particles pass through your body. 1 million. You do not feel them. You cannot detect them. They move through you the way light moves through glass, and without asking permission, without announcing themselves, leaving traces so small that the cumulative effect takes decades to become visible, if it becomes visible at all. Earth's magnetic field and the thick column of atmosphere above your head absorbs and deflects the most energetic of these particles before they reach you. You have been living inside a radiation shield your entire life without ever once being aware of it. Victor Glover, Christina Koch, Reed Wiseman, and Jeremy Hansen do not have that shield right now. Outside the Van Allen belts, the particle flux increases dramatically. The filtering that 4 billion years of evolution silently assumed would always be present is gone. And every hour they spend in that environment, their DNA repair mechanisms are working against a damage rate that the human body was simply never designed to face. The repair systems are real. The body is resilient, but resilience is not the same as immunity, and repair is not the same as perfection. Every repair leaves a margin of error. Every margin of error accumulates. Here is what makes this personal. The prefrontal cortex damage observed in those mouse studies, the region associated with judgment, with impulse control, with the ability to assess risk accurately, that is not an abstract concern located somewhere in the distance of a laboratory result. That is the biological substrate of every decision you have ever made that you are proud of. Every time you chose patience over reaction, every time you thought something through instead of acting on instinct, that capacity in the mice was measurably diminished by the radiation environment that 4 human beings are living inside right now. We do not know if the same thing happens in humans at these exposure levels. That is precisely the point. We're finding out for the first time with real people in the real environment using instruments sensitive enough to actually tell us something true. The universe beyond Earth's magnetic field is not hostile in the way that cold or vacuum is hostile. It is hostile in the way that time is hostile, quietly, invisibly, cumulatively, and 4 human beings are sitting inside that hostility right now, being measured so that the rest of us can eventually understand what it costs to leave. Before going any further, something needs to be said clearly and without qualification. Apollo was not a mistake. It was not a failure of imagination or a failure of science. 12 human beings walked on the surface of another world and came home alive. Engineers working with slide rules and magnetic core memory with computing power that a modern digital watch would embarrass, designed a system reliable enough to do that 6 times. Whatever critical lens we apply to the assumptions Apollo left behind, that achievement does not shrink. It stands exactly where history placed it. And to be precise about something else, the gaps we have been discussing were not oversights. They were deliberate boundaries. NASA in 1969 was not trying to solve deep space biology for 500-day Mars missions. They were trying to beat the Soviet Union to the moon before the end of the decade. Within those constraints, the science they did was honest, and the conclusions they drew were proportionate to the data they had. That is exactly the problem. Einstein spent years defending a static universe when his own equations suggested that space-time should be expanding or contracting, he introduced a cosmological constant, an invented term, specifically to hold the universe still because a static universe matched his intuition. When Edwin Hubble demonstrated in 1929 that galaxies were receding in every direction, Einstein called the cosmological constant the biggest mistake of his career. Not because he had been incompetent, because he had allowed a prior assumption to resist data that contradicted it. Apollo gave us 12 data points collected over 3 years with instruments that could not answer the questions we are now asking. For 50 years, those 12 data points shaped the assumptions underlying human spaceflight planning. That is not a criticism of Apollo. That is a description of how science works when it has not yet been challenged by better evidence. Artemis II is the better evidence, and the honest response to better evidence is to update what we believe. So where does this leave us? Not in despair, not in doubt about whether the endeavour is worth pursuing, but in a position of genuine productive uncertainty, which is the only honest place that science can stand when it is doing its job correctly. Here's what the next decade actually looks like based on what is currently planned, funded, and in various stages of construction. In the near term, the biological data from Artemis II will be analysed over the months following splashdown. Radiation exposure profiles, sleep architecture records, cardiovascular measurements, cognitive performance assessments, all of it will be compared against pre-mission baselines established for each crew member. This will be the first data set of its kind, not extrapolated from mice, not approximated from International Space Station telemetry collected inside Earth's magnetic field, actual human biological data from actual deep space. Whatever it shows will directly influence the medical protocols, crew selection criteria, and mission duration limits for every subsequent Artemis flight. In the middle term, the Lunar Gateway changes everything about what we can learn. A space station in lunar orbit with modules contributed by the United States, Europe, Japan, and Canada, designed to support crew rotations of 30 to 60 days in the deep space environment. This is the longitudinal study that Apollo could never run. Weeks of continuous human presence beyond Earth's protective field with full biological monitoring will generate the kind of statistically meaningful data that 12 people across 6 missions over 3 years simply cannot provide. In the longer term, the road to Mars runs directly through the answers that Artemis II and Gateway are beginning to collect. A crewed Mars mission at current planning estimates involves approximately 500 to 1,000 days of total deep space exposure. We do not yet know, with the precision that engineering requires, whether the human body can complete that journey without cognitive or cardiovascular damage that compromises the mission itself. We will know more in 5 years than we do today. We will know significantly more in 10. And here's the question worth sitting with as that data accumulates. If the biological evidence eventually suggests that unprotected human tissue cannot survive a Mars transit without meaningful neurological cost, that is not the end of the story. That is the beginning of a different set of problems: better shielding materials, pharmaceutical countermeasures, genetic screening, hibernation research. The problem does not disappear. It transforms into something more specific and therefore more solvable. Artemis II is not the answer. It is the first question asked with instruments precise enough to deserve a real answer. There is one moment in this mission that no technology can reach. When Artemis II passes behind the moon, every signal between the capsule and Earth disappears. No voice from Houston. No telemetry stream, no data link of any kind. For approximately 40 minutes, 4 human beings will exist in a communications blackout so complete that the most sophisticated mission control infrastructure ever built becomes, for that window of time, entirely irrelevant. 20,000 times faster computers, solar power arrays, laser communication systems, autonomous flight software, none of it matters behind the moon. The signal does not follow them there. Apollo astronauts knew that silence. Every crew that flew beyond Earth orbit between 1968 and 1972 passed through the same blackout in smaller capsules with less reliable systems, with far less certainty that the vehicle would perform as designed. They floated in that silence, and then they came back around and the signal returned and Houston said, "Welcome back," and the mission continued. That experience has not changed in 53 years. That is the one thing Artemis II shares completely and without modification with every Apollo crew that preceded it. The moon still blocks the signal. The void is still the void. Whatever measurements we take, whatever data we collect, whatever unknowns we resolve about radiation and cognition and heat shields and human psychology, we cannot instrument our way out of those 40 minutes. Perhaps that is the most honest thing deep space exploration has ever told us about ourselves. That for all the sophistication we bring to the problem, there remains a point beyond which the technology stops and something older begins. The willingness to go anyway, to trust the engineering knowing it is imperfect, to sit in the dark, far from everything familiar, with only the people beside you and the silence outside. Apollo knew that silence. Artemis II knows it now. Everything else is new. That has not changed. And maybe it never will.